I was working the closing shift at Footworks, the shoe store crammed into the far corner of the Chapel Hills Mall. Halloween was supposed to be a night of fun, but instead, I was stocking sneakers for minimum wage. I only had a half hour left on my shift, and I could feel the seconds crawling by. The clock on my phone felt frozen at 7:30 p.m. I drummed my fingers on the counter, trying to stay awake. My manager, who was supposed to help close, had ducked out for an early smoke break and never came back. Most of the customers had already thinned out, but there were still a few stragglers wandering around the mall. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my friend Ben. Ben, yo, you coming tonight or what? I sighed. I'd been dodging the question all day. Ben's Halloween party was supposed to be the big event of the night. Half the school was going, including all of my friends, but I hadn't planned on going. After my shift was over, all I really wanted to do was crash in my bed. I started typing probably not when another text popped up. Ben, don't be lame, it's Halloween. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. It had been a while since I'd done anything fun, and even though I didn't have a costume, I could probably grab something cheap from the Halloween store on the way. I wasn't exactly Mr. Social, but maybe it wouldn't hurt to get out of the house for once. Yo! A voice called from the store entrance, breaking my introspection. I looked up and saw Ben and Drake walking into the store like they owned the place. Ben flashed a grin, his hands stuffed in his pockets. Come on, bro. You're not getting out of this one. You're coming tonight, Ben said, leaning against the counter. Drake nodded, smirking. Yeah, man. You never come to anything. You didn't even show up to last year's either. Look, I started. I'm just tired. I don't even have a costume, and I don't even have time to... You've got time. The party doesn't start until 10. Grab something cheap and just show up. It's not like you have anything better to do. I sighed. They weren't wrong. As much as I wanted to protest, I started to give in to the pressure. Ben raised an eyebrow, a smirk growing on his face, anticipating my answer. Fine. I muttered. I'll come, but I probably won't stay long. Yes! There he is! Ben grinned, patted me on the shoulder. You're gonna have a good time, bud. Trust me. Drake glanced at his watch. All right. Well, we're heading out. See you there. I watched them leave, their laughter fading as they disappeared out of the mall. I wasn't sure I believed Ben about having a good time, but I was locked in now. I just had to make it through the last stretch of my shift, grab a costume, and then down a few drinks to make the night more tolerable. The mall was basically empty now. Most of the other stores were now closed, and the place began to get a little darker as more and more lights were turned off. I started mentally checking off the closing tasks. Sweep the floor, cash out the register, routine stuff. As I was counting the minutes to clock out, something caught my eye near the entrance. A person stood there, just outside the store facing me. They were in a Halloween costume, a creepy red latex devil mask, which had a large pointy nose and a cartoonish wide smile which reached ear to ear. Small black horns protruded from the top of the mask. It looked pretty realistic, like one of those expensive movie-quality masks. Had it not been so startling, it would have actually been pretty impressive. The mask was paired with a mismatched black and red suit that looks like it was put together from pieces found at a thrift store. At first, I assumed it was just a last-minute shopper, or someone probably killing time before heading to a party. But they stood completely still, facing me, not moving, not browsing, not shopping, just standing there. I felt my chest tighten. There was no reason to be freaked out by some weirdo in a Halloween costume, but something about them made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The way they were just standing still, watching me, began to eat away at my nerves. I was about to tell him, "We're closed," when he turned slowly, deliberately, and walked away. I just stared, frozen in place. His steps were slow, measured, almost robotic as he disappeared out of sight. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath the entire time. What the hell was that about? I thought. Just some creep messing around, probably. It was Halloween after all. I shook it off, trying to refocus on closing the store and getting out of there. But every few seconds, I found myself glancing towards the entrance, half expecting to see that creepy guy in a devil mask there again, watching me. By the time I finally clocked out, I was beat, and my nerves were shot. I made my way out of the now empty mall toward my car, checking behind my shoulder every few seconds. I safely made it to my car, now fully convinced that the person, whoever it was simply messing around with me. I brushed off the feeling and headed to the Halloween store to pick up a costume for the party. The Halloween store was one of those pop-up stores that showed up every year, taking over abandoned sporting goods stores and the like. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, a chime sound ringing loudly in the nearly empty store. The place was a mess. Shelves were mostly empty now, and decorations were scattered all over the floor, with a few straggling shoppers picking over the scraps. The sound of Halloween music played faintly through the speakers. I wandered aimlessly, searching for any scraps of a costume. The aisles were nearly bare, but I kept looking, feeling the pressure of time build. Suddenly, the music cut off, leaving the store in an uncomfortable silence. I knew I didn't have much time before they closed, so I hurried, eyes darting over the shelves. The door chimed again. Someone else had come in, but I didn't bother to look. I was too focused. At the end of one aisle, I found a small rack of cheap knockoff masks of famous movie killers. I grabbed a plastic Jason-style mask, headed for the register, rushing to get out. As I turned the corner, my heart lurched. There he was, the man in the devil mask. He stood at the far end of the aisle, illuminated by the dim, flickering light. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched me. My stomach twisted and my throat went dry. No fucking way, I thought, feeling my pulse hammer in my ears. He stood perfectly still, just staring. For a split second, I considered throwing the mask down and bolting, but something kept me rooted. Maybe it was disbelief, maybe shock. I told myself it was a coincidence, forcing my legs to carry me to the front. The cashier barely looked up from his phone as I approached, too busy scrolling through his phone. My skin crawled as I sensed the man in the devil mask move closer, his eyes locked on me. I could feel it, the weight of his stare boring into me. Just this, I muttered, tossing the cheap mask onto the counter. It felt so pointless, but at least I wouldn't show up to Ben's party without something. The cashier rang it up slowly, the beeps of the register cutting through the heavy silence. I kept my head down, resisting the urge to look back, but I knew he was still there, watching me. "That'll be 10.53, the cashier said, snapping his gum, finally glancing up at me. I handed him the crumpled bills, my hands shaking slightly as I grabbed the change and shoved the mask into a bag. Without another word, I made a quick escape toward the exit. The bell chimed again as I pushed through the door, and the cold night air hit me like a splash of water. I exhaled sharply, tension easing from my shoulders. Instinctively, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see him, the man in the devil mask, standing at the entrance, following me still. But there was nothing, just the empty store and a couple of people loitering on the sidewalk. He was gone again. I shook my head and got in my car. I kept reminding myself it's Halloween. Creepiness was just part of it. And besides, I had bigger things to worry about, like not making an idiot out of myself at Ben's party. By the time I got to Ben's place, the party was already in full swing. Cars were parked up and down the block, and I could hear the bass of the music thumping before I even stepped out of my car. The house was decorated to the nines, fake cobwebs hanging from the trees, jack-o'-lanterns lining the walkway, and orange lights flickering in the windows. I could hear Rob Zombie's Dragula blasting from inside the house. I pulled the plastic hockey mask out of the bag and slipped it over my face. It wasn't much, but it would do. I didn't feel like going all out for this party anyway. I just wanted to blend in, have a few drinks, and hopefully avoid any awkward moments with people. The front door was wide open, and people were spilling out into the yard, already tipsy and laughing too loud. I stepped inside, and the smell of beer and sweat hit me immediately. Ben's living room was packed. People in costumes, some elaborate and some as half-assed as mine, dancing, drinking, and yelling over the blaring music. "Hey, you actually came!" Ben appeared out of nowhere, clapping me on the back hard enough to nearly knock me over. He was wearing a vampire costume, complete with fake blood dripping from his mouth. "Yeah, well, you didn't really give me a choice," I said, jokingly, raising my voice to be heard over the music. "Here, grab a drink," Ben shouted, shoving a plastic cup of beer into my hand before I could protest. "We're playing beer pong in the kitchen, come on!" I hesitated. Beer pong wasn't really my thing, but it was better than standing around awkwardly in the corner. "Sure, yeah, why not?" I followed him into the kitchen, where a crowd had gathered around a table lined with orange plastic cups. Someone had set up a fog machine, and the room was filled with swirling white mist, making it hard to see more than a few feet in front of me. I took a swig of beer and tried to relax. It was just a party, after all. We played several rounds. The beer had begun to do its job with loosening me up, and I was actually starting to have some fun. For a moment, I even began to question myself on why I didn't come out more. But just as that thought occurred, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him again. The figure, that devil mask, that long pointed nose and wide smile. He was standing in the living room, just beyond the edge of the crowd, perfectly still like he had been at the store. He didn't move or try to talk to anyone. He just stood there, watching me. My throat went dry and my stomach twisted into knots. What the hell was he doing here? How did he follow me here? I blinked, half expecting him to disappear, like a trick of the light. But when I looked again, he was still there. He raised his hand and gave me a slow, taunting wave and turned to leave. Maybe it was the drinks, or maybe it was the feeling of security from the crowd. But anger began to boil up inside me. I sat my drink down and pushed through the crowd, trying to keep him in sight. I wanted to grab him and find out who he was and why the hell he was following me. But by the time I reached the living room, he was gone. Just like that. I scanned the room, my heart pounding in my chest. People were laughing, talking, and dancing like nothing was wrong. I thought about telling Ben, but what could I say? That some weirdo in a devil mask had been following me around all night? He'd just think I was being paranoid. I needed to calm down. I told myself it was just some guy playing a prank. Maybe someone who had been at the mall earlier and recognized me. Or maybe it was someone I knew just messing with me. It was Halloween. People were supposed to be creepy. I grabbed another beer, took a long drink, and forced myself to relax. It was just in my head. It's nothing to worry about. I didn't stay at the party long after that. After a couple more beers and some awkward small talk, I made my excuse and slipped out. I just wasn't in the mood anymore. All I could think about was that guy. Every time I turned around, I expected to see him in his devil mask, standing there, just watching. It was a relief to get back in my car and leave the noise and chaos behind. The streets were quiet as I drove home. The occasional group of teenagers in costumes still wandering the sidewalks. My parents' house was only a few blocks away, and when I pulled into the driveway, everything seemed peaceful. The porch light was on, and the pumpkins were lit on the front porch. I parked and walked up the front steps, fumbling with my keys as I unlocked the door. The quiet was almost comforting after the noise of the party. I stepped inside, closing the door softly behind me. "Mom? Dad?" I called out, but there was no answer. They had probably gone to bed already. I flipped on the hallway light and headed for the stairs, planning to just crash in my room and forget about the whole night. But something stopped me. A sound, a drip, a slow, steady drip. Not the drip of a sink, a heavy, thicker drip. Slowly, I made my way toward the sound in the direction of the kitchen. My breath caught in my throat as my eyes scanned around the house. As I got closer to the kitchen, the sound got louder. And there was something else, a smell, an odd smell, almost like copper, thick in the air. I rounded the corner into the kitchen when I saw the outline of something. No, not something, someone. I froze, my blood turning to ice. It was my dad. He was sitting at the kitchen table, and so was my mom. Only something was wrong. They were sitting at the table, side by side, like they had been waiting for me. But there was something horribly wrong. So wrong it took my brain a moment to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. Their heads were gone. The jagged, red stumps of their necks were all that remained. Blood streaking down their clothes, pulling into the floor. The table, once warm and familiar, was now soaked in it. My stomach lurched, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. I stood frozen in shock, every muscle locked in place as my brain struggled to process the nightmare in front of me. At first, I wasn't able to comprehend if what I was seeing was real or some twisted hallucination. And then I saw him. The man, the devil, was standing in the corner, almost blending into the shadows. He was big, much bigger up close, and his posture was unnervingly calm. In each hand, he held a head, their heads by the hair. The thick strands twisted around his fingers. In his hands, I saw the source of the sound. Blood dripped from their severed heads, landing on the tile floor with soft, rhythmic plip, plip, plip. The sound was horrible, and for a moment, all I could hear was the sound of the dripping and my own heartbeat. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just stood there, perfectly still. His arms were reached up toward me, holding my parents' heads proudly like two trophies. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in fear. I slowly backed away, step by step, my eyes never leaving him. His head didn't turn, his body didn't shift. He just stared with that pointy nose, that huge red smile, as if he were frozen in time. I kept moving backwards, my chest tightening with every inch I gained. The last thing I saw before I turned and ran was the man still standing there in the corner, heads dangling from his hands, utterly motionless, his cold eyes boring into me. He never moved, and somehow that was worse. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was halfway down the street, gasping for breath, my hand shaking as I fumbled for my phone. My fingers barely worked as I dialed 911, my voice trembling as I told the operator what had happened. When the police arrived, the house was empty. The man, the devil, was gone. They never found him. The police chalked it up to some kind of gruesome home invasion. But I knew the truth. He had been following me the whole night, maybe longer, watching, waiting for the perfect moment. He had wanted me to see, to know. He chose me for a reason. That was last Halloween, when my life was forever changed. I'm terrified he's going to come back for me this Halloween. I'm terrified that at any moment I'm going to see that mask again.